Welcome to the Car Cult. On today's show, we launch a new series on the Car Cult channel, The History of Cars. In this series, we explore the nearly 200 years of the motor car. We will be diving deep into car brands and models of today and yesteryear. We will be exploring how the invention of the motor car changed the course of history and left an indelible mark on human civilization. So buckle up for some of the most fascinating stories that the motor world and history has to offer. On our very first show, we will be taking a look at how the venerable Ford Motor Company helped win World War I for the Allies. From 1914 to 1918, the war to end all wars led to the death of millions and the destruction of much of Europe. At the same time, the Great War was transformative for the motor industry, both in the use of vehicles on the battlefield and for the way we all choose to travel to work, to visit the local shopping mall, or traveling cross-country for a holiday break. Chapter 1. The Beginnings. The Ford Motor Company was founded in 1903 by Henry Ford. Henry was the eldest of 6 siblings born in 1863 in Michigan. Henry's parents, William and Mary Ford, were farmers, but this was not the destiny for Henry. By the time he was 12, Henry was spending most of his spare time in a small machine shop, and at 15 he would construct his first steam engine. As a young man, Henry moved to Detroit and became an apprentice at a number of different companies before he landed an engineer role at the Edison Illuminating Company in 1891. Henry quickly progressed and soon became chief engineer, which allowed him to branch out on his own. Thomas Edison would become Henry's lifelong mentor and friend. In 1896, Henry created the quadricycle, his very first car. At home, Henry Ford went on to found the Detroit Automobile Company in 1899. This turned into a disaster for Ford and its investors when only 20 vehicles were built and $86,000 were lost. The company was reorganized into the Henry Ford Company. Henry would go on to leave the company bearing his own name in 1902, which was again reorganized into the Cadillac Automobile Company by Henry Leland. In 1903, the Ford Motor Company would be founded by Henry Ford and a group of investors. The first car to be built by the company, the Model A, would be sold a month later in July 1903. In 1908, Ford would introduce the Model T to America and the world. Demand was so high, Ford were forced into developing a new revolutionary mass production technique. This innovation allowed a new Model T to be built from start to finish in just 90 minutes. By 1911, Ford would expand out of their Mack Avenue plant with a branch assembly plant in Kansas City, the first of its kind. Another first would be the company's overseas production plant in Manchester, England. The revolution in car production would not end there. In 1913, Henry Ford introduced the world's first moving assembly line for cars, and in 1914 would seek to further boost production by increasing daily wages to $5 for an 8-hour day. By mid-1914, there were more than 500,000 Model Ts on the roads around the world. The success of the industrialist Henry Ford and his Ford Motor Company appeared to be unstoppable. Unbeknownst to Ford and to the rest of America, the world was to be plunged into war on a scale and ferocity of which had never been seen before. Chapter 2. The Great War. On June 28, 1914, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne is shot dead by a gunman, Gavrilo Princip, during a visit to Sarajevo, the capital of the Austrian province Bosnia. The killer is backed by Serbian terrorist group, the Black Hand. This triggers frantic negotiations between the great powers of the time, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Germans, Russia, France, and Britain. Serbia refuses to abide by all the onerous demands placed on it by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. On July 28, backed by Germany, Austria. Hungary declares war on Serbia. Russia quickly steps in to support its ally and mobilizes its army. Germany then goes on to declare war on Russia. France begins preparations for war. As a supporter of Russia, whilst many view the fighting will be short-lived and the leaders of these nations will see sense, the war will go on to drag the British Empire into the conflict when Germany attacks France via neutral Belgium. With the entry of Britain into the conflict, this becomes the first truly global war, and by early August reaches into the overseas territories of France, Britain, and Germany in Africa. World War I goes on to also be the first mechanized war, with the introduction of tanks and armored cars and trucks beginning to replace the traditional horse and cart. The first offensive using tanks takes place on September 15th, 1916, during the Battle of the Somme, when the Mark I type British tank is committed to the Allies' offensive against the Germans. This results in some small localized successes, with much of the world at war. One emerging power, the United States of America, has followed American public opinion and stayed out of the war. However, over time, as word of the atrocities committed by the Germans reached the shores of the United States and the sinking of the passenger liner RMS Lusitania by a German U-boat, killing all 1,198 passengers and crew on board, including 128 American citizens, that opinion begins to shift. In April 1917, some 2.5 years after the start of the war, the Americans throw its full support behind the Allies. Chapter 3. Ford enters the war. Mirroring the reluctance of the United States of America to enter into the war, Henry Ford and the Ford Motor Company only started to contribute to the Allies' cause from spring 1917. Prior to this, the Ford Motor Company refused to take orders for any war-related equipment from any country. Henry Ford cited selling war-related equipment and helping any foreign state as at variance with our human principles. Henry Ford's reservations about the war stemmed from his pacifist beliefs that war was created by people who stood to profit from it. In his autobiography, My Life and Work, when commenting on World War I, he said, "I have never been able to discover any honorable reason for the beginning of the World War. It seems to have grown out of a very complicated situation created largely by those who thought they could profit by war." Henry Ford would go on to finance a diplomatic mission to Europe in 1915 when he commissioned the Oscar II ocean liner to become the peace ship to carry himself and several prominent peace activists to Europe. This mission was widely ridiculed in the press and lived up to its low expectations when the negative reaction in the press caused infighting amongst the group, and there was a flu outbreak on board. Ford left Norway 5 days after arriving, having fallen ill, and realizing that the mission had failed. Ford would go on to say in his autobiography that he did not regret the failed mission, and "We learn more from our failures than from our successes." Once the decision was made to support the American war effort, the Ford factories ramped up production and produced some of the icons of the war, including various versions of the Model T and the Ford 3-ton M. 1918, the Ford Motor Company would go on to also produce warboats, military trucks, cannons, and work on research and development into armor technology for vehicles and soldiers on the front lines. Here is a rundown of some of the most important contributions from the Ford Motor Company during World War I. Chapter 4. Model T. Great Britain and France would approach Ford in order to acquire Model Ts for military purposes early in the war. However, Henry Ford's isolationist and pacifist views would put an end to any contributions from Ford to the Allies. The turning point would be the entry of the United States of America into the war. The Model T itself would be adapted for various purposes during the course of World War I. It would see use as a delivery truck, staff, car, and an artillery mover, but is probably best remembered for being adapted for ambulance duty. Many of the Model Ts would be produced in the standard black, and it would be left to American GIs to paint the cars in the iconic olive color that American military vehicles became known for during the war. A total of 5,340 Model Ts were ordered for use by the United States Army. The potential of these ambulances would see France order 2,400 for frontline use. Even during the early periods of the war, when Ford was reluctant to provide any support to the Allies, through some creative acquisition processes, France were able to purchase and adapt 11,000 Model Ts for the French Army. Britain would go on to accumulate a massive fleet of 20,000 to 30,000 Model Ts, whilst the United States military would go on to use the likes of Jeep and Humvee as an adaptable light-duty vehicle after the war. The sheer versatility of the Model T during World War I would be vital for the support of Americans and the Allies. Ford would sell the U.S. military thousands of chassis for various uses, and would even pull units from stock to respond rapidly to the war effort. The United States military would acquire some 15,000 Model Ts, which would allow the American Expeditionary Force to be the first truly motorized military operation in history. The flexible and reliable Model T would show that the days of the horse and cart are not just numbered in American middle-class suburbs, but also on the future battlefield. Chapter 5, Ford 3-Ton M, 1918. The Ford 3-Ton M, 1918, was one of the first American-designed tanks, weighing in at 3 tons, 14 feet in length and a width and height of 6 feet. This small tank was designed to be crewed by 2 people, a driver and a gunner. The tank was armed with an M1917 Marlin machine gun and later on an M1919 Browning machine gun, powered by 2 Ford Model T engines producing 45 horsepower. This tank had a range of 55 kilometers or 34 miles and a maximum speed of a dizzying 8 miles per hour. The M1918 allowed American troops to operate its own indigenous tank, having had to rely on British and French tanks, notably the Renault FT thus far in the war. An initial production run of 15 vehicles were built and tested in France. A contract for 15,000 tanks was awarded to Ford, but the U.S. Tank Corps felt the vehicle did not meet their needs, and the armistice ended the contract with only the original 15 vehicles ever produced. 2 known examples remain, one at the U.S. Army Armor Cavalry Collection at Fort Benning, Georgia, and the other at the Ordnance Collection at Fort Lee, Virginia. Whilst the 3-ton had a negligible impact upon the war, it did prove that the United States had the capability to design and build its own tank, and would go on to reduce American reliance on foreign powers. Chapter 6, Eagle Class Patrol Boat. The first vehicle out of Ford's Rouge plant in 1918 was not a Model T, but rather a submarine chaser called the Eagle Class Patrol Boat, fully utilizing Ford's innovative production line, manufacturing. Ford was churning out 1 boat every 10 days, a record-breaking feat. Henry Ford himself would state in relation to Ford Motor Company's efforts to build the boat, "They were built simply by applying our production principles to a new product." This would be a guiding principle for the Ford Motor Company whenever the United States of America was in need. No more so than 20 years later in World War II. The Eagle-class patrol boat was over 200 feet in length and displaced 625 tons. The boat sought to replace the limited capability of the existing wooden hull submarine chasers, which were limited to coastal work. Henry Ford would be summoned by the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, in June 1917 to serve on the United States Shipping Board. Wilson was seeking to leverage Ford's mass production techniques to speed up shipbuilding. When the German U-boat threat was highlighted to Ford, he would be quickly drawn in by the Secretary of the Navy, Josephus Daniels, to build a new craft that no other facility in the United States was capable of producing. He would be directed to produce 100 to 500 Eagle-class anti-submarine patrol boats for the United States at a price of $275,000 per ship. By Armistice Day, 7 ships had been sent to the Atlantic coast, but only 2 had arrived. The original contract was reduced to 60 ships. The ships would go on to see action in World War II, where they were actively engaged in anti-submarine warfare. Only one ship, Eagle 56, was sunk by a German submarine when torpedoes hit the bow and stern, resulting in the loss of 49 men. The remaining boats were decommissioned after the conclusion of the Second World War. Chapter 7. Post-war Ford. Following the signing of the armistice by the Germans on November 11, 1918, the fighting on land, sea and air ended. The peace between Germany and the Allies was formalized in the Treaty of Versailles on June 28, 1919, exactly 5 years after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. With the conclusion of the war and the breakout of an unsettled peace between the belligerents of the Great War, Henry Ford and the Ford Motor Company resumed normal peacetime construction of the Model T. Henry Ford would take over a newspaper titled the Dearborn Independent in 1919. He would use the paper as a means to spread his specific views on pacifism and would controversially name the Jews as profiteering from the war. These views would be picked up by a young Austrian drifter and failed artist named Adolf Hitler. We all know how that ended. The Ford Motor Company would go on to more success after the war. By 1923, over half of the cars produced in the United States would be Ford, and by the end of the 1920s, Ford would have more than 20 overseas assembly plants in Europe, Latin America, Canada, Asia, South Africa, and Australia. A total of 15 million Model Ts would be produced. It would be 20 short years before the world was plunged into another horrifying conflict, and the Ford Motor Company and a bevy of new car manufacturers were called upon by their respective nations to contribute to the war effort in new and unprecedented ways. The war to end all wars turned out to be anything but. However, the motor industry never looked back from this turning point in world history and would come to redefine how we live, work, and play. If you like this type of content and would like to see more, please like, subscribe, and comment on this video. We appreciate all your help to grow this channel and the community. Until next time on the Car Cult. Welcome to the Car Cult. Following our first show in this new series called The History of Cars, where we explored how the venerable Ford Motor Company helped to win World War I for the Allies, we will be delving even further into the past and look at the fascinating history behind the origins of the motor car. Before we dive into this video, first a message on this series and the Car Cult channel. On the Car Cult channel, we are hoping to bring weekly shows to you, our viewers, on all that is happening in the car world, whether it is new car announcements, car culture, or car-related entertainment and video games, or at the movies. This is your one place for everything to do with cars. In the History of Cars series, we will be exploring the nearly 200 years of the motor car. We will be diving into how the invention of the motor car changed the course of history and how it left an indelible mark on human civilization. So, buckle up for some of the most fascinating stories that the motor world and history has to offer. Chapter 1. What is a car? Before we can launch into finding the first car ever made, we have to define what a car actually is. This is more complex than may appear at first sight. Can a car be simply defined as an object that transports people or cargo on wheels? Well, in that case, we would have to go back to ancient times. And the first car would, in times of peace, be the humble horse and cart, or in the theater of war, the mighty chariot. That doesn't seem right. An important element in the car is the manner in which it is propelled forward. I think we can all agree the propulsion method has to be something other than an animal or human. This would leave us with propulsion methods such as gasoline, electric, hydrogen, or a renewable option such as solar or wind. Or if you don't want to ever fill up again a nuclear-powered car. So we are going to keep our definition very broad and define the car as an object that can transport people or cargo over land on wheels using a propulsion method other than an animal or human. The one other element that we would need to bring into our definition would be the size of the car, as we want to differentiate the car from a semi. So for the purpose of our exploration of the very first cars, let's define the car as having the ability to transport between 1 and 8 people. Having now defined what a car is, let's take a look at some of the very earliest examples of what would become the world-changing motor industry. Chapter 2. The First Cars. Steam Machine of Verbiest. The very first example of what would be passable as a car was a steam-powered vehicle designed by a Flemish member of a Jesuit mission in China all the way back in 1672. Born in 1623, Ferdinand Verbiest was a missionary in China during the Qing dynasty. He was a man of many talents, being an accomplished mathematician and astronomer. He went on to prove to the third emperor of the Qing dynasty, known as the Kangxi Emperor, that European astronomy was more accurate than Chinese methods. Ferdinand Verbiest would become a close friend to the Kangxi Emperor, teaching him geometry, philosophy, and music. Verbiest would go on to design what some have claimed is the first ever car, being a self-propelled vehicle that was small in size, measuring in at 65 centimeters long. It is not known if the designs were ever built, but due to its diminutive size, it was unable to carry a driver or any passengers, and as such falls outside of what we would view as a car. Fardier à vapeur. We would see the very first actual full-size self-propelled mechanical vehicle designed and built by Nicolas Joseph Cugnot in around 1769. Known as the Fardier à vapeur, this is widely regarded as the very first example of what is effectively the world's first automobile. Cugnot was born in Lorraine, France, where he trained as a military engineer. In 1765, he began experimenting with working models of steam engine-powered vehicles for the French army. The intention was to transport cannons to the front lines of the battlefield. Cugnot would convert the reciprocating motion of a steam piston into a rotary motion by utilizing a ratchet arrangement. He would make a small version of his three-wheeled Fardier à vapeur in 1769. A full-sized version would be built a year later and was specified to be able to carry 4 tons and travel at 4.8 miles per hour, a performance that it would not be able to meet in practice. The vehicle itself weighed in at 2 tons and had 2 wheels at the rear and 1 at the front, replacing where the horses would normally be. The front wheels supported a steam boiler and the driving mechanism. It was steered by a double handle arrangement and could reportedly seat 4 passengers and travel at a sprightly 2.25 miles per hour. The vehicle was said to be very unstable due to its poor weight distribution, something which would not be ideal on the battlefield where it was expected to travel over rough terrain and even climb steep hills. The steam boiler was known for its terrible performance, and the vehicle's fire needed to be relit and its steam raised again every quarter of an hour, reducing its overall speed and distance it could travel. After some trials of the vehicle, the project would be canned by the French army. But even so, King Louis XV would grant Cugnot a pension of 600 livres a year for his innovative work, and the vehicle itself would be kept at the Paris Arsenal. In 1800, it was moved to the Conservatoire National des Arts et Métiers, where it can still be seen today. The Fardier of Vapeur would obtain another less honorable first when a second prototype vehicle would be involved in the world's very first car accident, when it knocked down a brick or stone wall in a Paris garden or part of the Paris Arsenal walls. The story would be reported some 33 years after the incident is alleged to have happened, with a story persisting that Coudnot was arrested and convicted of dangerous driving. Another alleged first for him, Puffing Devil. In 1801, Richard Trevithick, a British inventor and mining engineer, would build what is thought as the first steam-powered road vehicle. Richard would be an early pioneer of steam-powered road and rail transport, with significant contributions to the development of the first high-pressure steam engine and the first working railway steam locomotive. His early experiments involved high-pressure steam engines, first with a stationary one, and then one attached to a road carriage. Richard would go on to build a full-size steam road locomotive in 1801, which he would name the Puffing Devil. The vehicle was equipped with a firebox enclosed within the boiler, with one vertical cylinder. The motion of the single piston was transmitted directly to the driving wheels by means of connecting rods. The Puffing Devil reportedly weighed 1,520 kilograms fully loaded and had a speed of 9 miles per hour. He successfully demonstrated the vehicle when it carried 6 passengers up 4th Street in Cambourne. The locomotive would break down 3 days later when it passed over a gully in the road. The vehicle would be left under some shelter with the fire for the steam engine still burning. The operators would head to a local pub for a meal and drinks whilst the water boiled off. The engine overheated and burned before setting fire to a shed. The vehicle was destroyed in the resulting fire. This would be no setback for Richard, and instead, he would use it as the testing ground for what would be dubbed the world's first self-propelled passenger carrying vehicle, the London Steam Carriage. London Steam Carriage. Not all the details of this carriage are known, but the original patent has survived. The carriage had 8-foot diameter driving wheels, which were designed to smooth out the road surfaces and prevent the fire from being extinguished from the shaking. The engine had a single horizontal cylinder, which, along with the boiler and firebox, were placed over the rear axle in contrast to the Fardier of Vapeur. The piston motion was transmitted to a separate crankshaft via a forked piston pod, with the crankshaft driving the axle of the driving wheels. When completed, the London Steam Carriage was driven 10 miles through the streets of London with 7 or 8 passengers at a speed of between 4 to 9 miles per hour. Unfortunately for Trevithick, he would crash the carriage into some house railings. The lack of interest from potential purchasers and lack of further investment would cause the carriage to be scrapped. Chapter 3. The first internal combustion car, hydrogen gas car. In 1807, Isaac de Rivaz patented a hydrogen-powered internal combustion engine with electric ignition. De Rivaz would fit the engine to a primitive working vehicle, which has become considered the world's first internal combustion-powered automobile. The French-born Swiss inventor became fluent in Latin and mastered mathematics and geometry while studying mechanics throughout his life. He would start to experiment with steam-powered vehicles and studied ignition of combustion gases. After retiring from the army, he would use his experience with cannons to lead him to think about utilizing the explosive charge to drive a piston instead of steam. In 1804, he began to experiment with explosives created inside a cylinder with a piston. He would go on to invent a primitive internal combustion engine, which was powered by a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen and manually ignited by an electric spark. What would become known as the de Rivaz engine was pioneering. This engine would be placed in a small experimental vehicle in 1807, and then in 1813, he would build a larger 6-meter-long vehicle weighing almost a ton, and called the Grand Char Mécanique. The explosive gas mixture used was now composed of about 2 liters of coal gas and 10 to 12 liters of air. Rivaz would be pilloried by his peers, and the French Academy of Sciences would argue that internal combustion engines would never rival the performance of the steam engines. Chapter 4. First electric car. With the world recently transitioning to electric-powered vehicles at an unprecedented pace due to a combination of government policies around the world to move away from the consumption of fossil fuels and towards more green energy sources, it may come as a surprise that the very first electric car was not a Tesla, but rather a 3-wheeled car, created in 1881. Gustave Trouve was born in 1839 and was highly respected for his innovative skill in miniaturization. He would invent a carbon-zinc pocket-sized battery to power his miniature electric automata, which would become very popular. In 1881, Gustave improved the efficiency of a small electric motor developed by Siemens and using a recently developed rechargeable battery. He would fit it to an English James Starley tricycle, inventing the world's first electric vehicle. In 1881, Gustave presented the electric car driven by an improved Siemens motor at the Exposition Internationale d'Électricité de Paris. The first 4-wheeled electric car in the world would be built 7 years later, with the introduction of the Flocken Electro Wagon in 1888. Chapter 5. First true modern car. The year of 1886 would become known as the birth of the modern car. The very first practical, marketable car that could be used every day would be created by the German Karl Benz when he patented his Benz patent Motorwagen. The Benz Motorwagen would be built in 1885 in Mannheim, Germany, and the patent for his invention would be granted in the following year. He is widely acknowledged as the inventor of the car. All the previous cars that we have explored had 3 things in common. They were impractical, unsuccessful, and never entered series production. The Benz patent Motorwagen would enter series production, and about 25 Benz vehicles would be sold between 1888 and 1893. The first stationary gasoline engine, developed by Karl Benz, was a 1-cylinder, 2-stroke unit on New Year's Eve, 1879. This engine would bring so much commercial success that Benz would devote more of his time to creating a lightweight car powered by a gasoline engine, in which the chassis and engine formed a single unit. The major features of the 2-seater Motorwagen were the compact, high-speed single-cylinder 4-stroke engine installed horizontally at the rear, the tubular steel frame, the differential, and 3-wire spoked wheels. The engine would produce a mighty 0.75 horsepower and sped the car to 10 miles per hour. Benz designed the car with rear-wheel drive, and it was steered by means of the front wheel, which was suspended in an unsprung fork and could be steered by a toothed rack connected with a crank. The driving speed could be controlled by means of a sleeve valve underneath the driver's seat. The brake was a hand lever acting on the countershaft belt pulley. A multi-speed transmission, foot brake, and reverse gear were not yet incorporated into the Motorwagen. To prove the roadworthiness of the car, Bertha Benz, wife of Karl Benz, undertook the first long-distance road trip by car in August 1888 with her 2 sons, Eugen and Richard. The journey would be undertaken without the knowledge of her husband and would total 110 miles, from Mannheim to Pforzheim and back. In this one journey, Bertha would demonstrate the practicality of the motor vehicle to the whole world. Without the courageous initiative of Bertha, the growth of the Benz company into creating the world's largest automobile plant at the time, and the freedom that the motor vehicle would bring to humanity, would have been unthinkable. If you would like more videos on the very first cars and the origins of the motor vehicle, please like, subscribe, and comment on what you would like to see. We appreciate all your help to grow this channel and the community. Until next time on The Car Cult. Welcome to the Car Cult. On this episode of the History of Cars, we explore the extraordinary lives of a group of wealthy British motorists that have become known as the Bentley Boys. They were the Brat Pack before the Rat Pack. This group made Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and the rest of the Rat Pack look like a convent of nuns. Before we dive into this video, first a message on this series and the Car Cult channel. On the Car Cult channel, we are hoping to bring regular shows to you, our viewers, on all that is happening in the car world, whether it is new car announcements, car culture, or car-related entertainment in video games, or at the movies. This is your one place for everything to do with cars. In the History of Cars series, we will be exploring the nearly 200 years of the motor car. We will be diving into how the invention of the motor car changed the course of history and how it left an indelible mark on human civilization. So buckle up for some of the most fascinating stories that the motor world and history has to offer. Chapter 1. The Original Bentley Boy. Before the term Bentley Boys gained notoriety, there was one Walter Owen Bentley who would found a sports car manufacturer in his name in 1919. Born in 1888, W.O. Bentley would have a passion for motion from an early age. He would leave school at 16 and start an apprenticeship with the Great Northern Railway and live out his dream of hurling coal into the firebox of the train. His passion would soon transition to the road when he bought himself a quadrant motorcycle and would plunge into the world of racing. He would practice on his motorcycle in the early hours of the morning so that he would avoid the police speed traps. His first success would come in 1907 when he would take part in the London Edinburgh trial. He broke down outside Edinburgh, but would manage to repair the bike and still finish with a time that would take the gold medal. He would go on to win further golds in the London, Plymouth and London Land's End trials a year later. As his experience in racing grew, his knowledge of enhancing engine performance would become legendary. He would go into business with his brothers in 1912, when he would start importing French cars made by Doriot, Flandin, and Parent. Whilst on a visit to their offices in France, he would pick up a paperweight made of aluminium, and would be possessed with the thought of the possibilities of this lightweight material being used to make a better piston than steel or cast iron. He would begin experimenting with aluminium in order to add strength to the metal and stop it from melting at the high temperatures it would be exposed to within an engine. He would create a new alloy at the foundry when he finally settled on a formula of 88% aluminium and 12% copper. By adding these new pistons to the DFP cars, he would take victory at Brooklands and set a new record of 89.7 miles per hour for a flying mile. When the First World War broke out, W.O. Bentley would put his ambitions of starting his own car company on hold and would instead join the Royal Naval Air Service as a captain, where he used his aluminium pistons to create an engine for fighter aircraft that would be more powerful and reliable than previous versions. The first Bentley rotary engine, the BR-1, made the Sopwith Camel the most successful British aircraft of the war. Following the conclusion of the war, W.O. would be awarded £8,000 from the Commission of Awards to Inventors, and he would use these funds to start his own car company. So on July 10, 1919, the Bentley Motors Company was born, with a philosophy of make a fast car, a good car, the best in its class, something that will be core to the company's philosophy for the next century. Chapter 2. The Bentley Boys Arrive. In the 1920s and 30s, the Bentley Motor Company's racing credentials would reach a new pinnacle thanks to a group of wealthy men who would become known as the Bentley Boys. This group of extraordinary playboys, racers, and adventurers would achieve worldwide notoriety. They would inspire a whole generation of racers with their passion for driving and deep love of a challenge. W.O. himself would describe the influence of the Bentley Boys on the Bentley Motor Company as, "I don't think many companies can have built up during such a short period, a comparable font of legend and myth, story and anecdote. The company's activities attracted the public's fancy and added a touch of color, of vicarious glamour and excitement to drab lives. The Bentley boys would include the former fighter pilot, Sir Tim Birkin, Harley Street specialist J.D. Benji Benjafield, racing journalist Sammy Davis, born adventurer Glenn Kidston, and would be led by Wolf Babe Barnato. They would take life to the extreme, hit headlines for their exploits off the racetrack as much as their extraordinary performances on it. On today's episode, we will cover some of the crazier and more prominent Bentley boys, but not everyone, as we could spend hours on their wild exploits. Maybe one for a future episode. Chapter 3, Wolf Babe Barnato. The leader of the group, Wolf Babe Barnato, was a British financier and racing driver. Born in 1895 in London, he was the youngest son of Barney Barnato and Fanny Bees. The family fortune would be made as a landlord in South African diamond and gold mining. When Wolf was 2 years old, his father would die during a sea crossing from South Africa to London. The official report would state it was suicide as a result of death by drowning while temporarily insane. Wolf went on to inherit his father's fortune. Wolf would receive a further inheritance when Wolf Barnato Joel, his relative from the Joel family and another South African mining magnate, was murdered in 1898. Wolf was educated at Trinity College in Cambridge. But it wasn't academia that was his passion. Instead, he would seek the thrill of various sports at a young age. He immersed himself in the sport, practiced endlessly, and took lessons from the very best tutors. This desire to excel would see him collect prizes for motorboat racing by using a Bentley-powered boat called Ardenrun 5, which was named after his house, where he bred horses. Wolf became a strong swimmer, had a good amateur boxing career, and also played tennis to a semi-professional standard. During World War I, he served as an officer in the Royal Field Artillery Division of the British Army, with overseas campaigns in France, Egypt, and Palestine, and attained the rank of captain during the latter stages of the war. During the course of the war, he broke off his business ties with the Joel's family, resulting in a long legal dispute in South Africa. Following the settlement of the case, he went on to play first-class cricket for Surrey County Cricket Club as a wicket-keeper between 1928 and 1930. A few years before his budding cricket career, Wolf purchased his first Bentley, a 3-liter, which he would win numerous Brooklands races in. Only 12 months later, he purchased the Bentley Motor Company itself. The Bentley business had been underfunded for a long time, and yet through the exploits of the likes of John Duff and Frank Clement, would win the Le Mans 24 Hours race in 1924. Wolf invested an initial amount of £100,000, which saved the business and its workforce from being laid off. The business was reorganized, creditors were paid off, and Wolf became controlling shareholder of the company and its new chairman. Wolf then injected further funds into the company in 1927 and again in 1928 and 1929. With this financial backing, WO was able to design and build a new generation of cars that elevated the brand to new heights. The first of these cars was the 6-cylinder, 6.5-liter that was to morph into the epic Bentley Speed 6. Wolf would push WO to produce the 4.5-liter that became the famous blower Bentley. The racing version of the blower went on to win the 24 Hours race in 1928, when Wolf teamed up with New Zealander and fellow Bentley boy Bernard Rubin. Wolf won the 24-hour race again in 1929 and 1930, when he raced in the Bentley Speed 6, which would be given the affectionate name of Old Number 1. On these successful wins, he teamed up with Sir Henry Tim Birkin and Glenn Kidston, respectively. These were the only years that Wolf would enter the Le Mans race, which earned him a perfect win ratio, and WO himself would say of Wolf that he was the best driver we ever had, and I consider the best British driver of his day, one who never made a mistake and always obeyed orders. Following his exploits in Le Mans, Wolf would enter the Blue Train races. In March 1930, while sitting at a dinner party on a yacht in Cannes, the talk amongst the group would turn to motor cars and the recent marketing from Rover that their Light 6 car could go faster than the famous Lou Train Blue Express, which was a luxury night train that carried passengers between Calais and the French Riviera. The Blue Train, which got its name from the dark blue sleeping cars, was beaten for the first time by a motor vehicle in January 1930, when the Rover Light 6 achieved the 750-mile journey in around 20 minutes less than the over 20 hours it took the train to complete the journey. The achievement turned the Rover team into celebrities. One of those at the dinner was Wolf, who described the Rover achievement as no great shakes, and raised the stakes when he argued that in his Bentley Speed 6, he would not only beat the train from the French Riviera to Calais, but that he would be back at his club in London before the train had even reached Calais. He placed a £200 wager on his success. The very next day, on March 13th, 1930, as the Blue Train steamed out of Calais station at 5:30 p.m., Wolf and his co-driver, an amateur golfer, Dale Bourne, finished their drinks and then drove the Speed 6 out of the Carlton bar. They battled through heavy rain and would even lose time when they began searching for a refueling point in Auxerre. As they progressed through central France, they hit thick fog, and then when approaching Paris, one of the tires burst. They reached the dock at Boulogne at 10:30 a.m., and sailed to England. They crossed the south of England and arrived at the Conservative Club in St. James Street in London at 3:20 p.m., some 4 minutes before the Blue Train reached Calais. Wolf won the bet, but the French authorities fined Bentley Motors £160 for racing on public roads and barred Bentley from the Paris Salon of 1930. This race would inspire another generation when Top Gear regularly featured Jeremy Clarkson taking on James May and Richard Hammond in car versus public transport races. Following the Wall Street crash in 1929, demand for luxury Bentley cars was badly affected and 2 mortgage payments on the company falling due in 1931. Wolf accepted the inevitable, and following a period in receivership, Bentley was acquired by Rolls-Royce. Wolf received £42,000 in return for his share of the business and was again on the board of Bentley Motors in 1934. Wolf's spending on racing success was only matched by his spending on lavish properties, including his house in London, where he lived whilst married to Dorothy Maitland, and then, after his divorce, he moved to a flat at 50 Grosvenor Square in Mayfair, London. A number of the other Bentley boys would have flats of their own in the same block, and with the amount of Bentleys parked there, the local taxi drivers would dub it Bentley's Corner. He also owned a country house in Surrey named Arden Run Place, which was where Wolf threw lavish champagne-fueled motor racing parties with his friends until it was destroyed in a fire in 1933. He then built his own large house, which cost £100,000 all the way back in 1938. The house featured revolutionary central heating, a talkie cinema, and a drive lit by secret light rays. The house had 25 bedrooms, a heated swimming pool, and was set in 25 acres overlooking the River Thames. During this third and final marriage, he even bought his own island, an 8-acre plot named Parrots Island in Bermuda. In recognition of his sporting accomplishments, the Sports Car Club of America would name its most prestigious award after Wolf, with the first Wolf Barnato Award presented in 1948 after his death in the same year. Chapter 4. Dudley Benji Benjafield. Before Wolf won his 3 successive titles, there was another of the Bentley boys who would win Le Mans the year before, in 1927. Dudley Benjafield, who was given the nickname Benji by his friends, was a British medical doctor and racing driver. He was born in London in 1887 and would receive his medical doctorate at University College Hospital, where he specialized in bacteriology and used his expertise when he served in Egypt during World War I, and later in combating the Great Flu epidemic of 1918. He developed a passion for motorsports, first in boating and then motor vehicles. Following the destruction of his motorboat, he would purchase a Bentley 3-liter and started racing in 1924. His early success led him to being offered a company racer at the request of WO. He was regarded as the most modest, thoughtful, and deceptively skillful member of the Bentley boys. And whilst he may not have been the fastest, the fact that he had the discipline to follow team orders led him to win the Le Mans race in 1927 with his fellow Bentley boys co-driver, Sammy Davis, despite the car being badly damaged and the team having to make on-the-spot repairs, including strapping torches to replace the smashed headlights. This allowed Benji and Sammy Davis to race through the night. At the Savoy Celebration dinner, the toast to someone who should be present was proposed as the battle-scarred Bentley, known as Old Number 7, was wheeled into the dining room as the guest of honor. This would be a tradition that Bentley revived nearly 80 years later, when the Bentley Speed 8 was the guest of honor at the Le Mans Victory Dinner. Benji competed in Le Mans a total of 7 times, but whilst he managed to achieve a third-place finish, he would not manage to take the win again. He, however, left a lasting legacy when he founded the British Racing Drivers Club in 1936. The club continues to operate today and is the owner of the Formula One racetrack, Silverstone, host of the British Grand Prix, Chapter 5, Sir Henry Tim Birkin. Born in 1896, he gained the nickname of Tim after the childhood comic book character Tiger Tim, an extremely popular book at the time. During his military career, he contracted malaria, a disease that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Shortly after the war, in 1921, Birkin took up motor racing and competed in a few Brooklands races. He was forced to retire from racing due to business and family pressures. But then in 1927, he was back in a 6-hour race when he entered in a 3-liter Bentley. The return to motor racing would be against his family wishes, but there was no stopping him as he acquired a 4.5-liter Bentley a year later and became a familiar sight on the racetrack with his blue and white spotted silk scarf around his neck. He persuaded the wealthy heiress, Dorothy Paget, to finance a team of supercharged 4.5-liter Bentleys that became known as the Blowers. In 1928, Birkin entered Le Mans and led the race for 20 laps until a jammed wheel forced him to drop back, resulting in a 5th-place finish. A year later, he went on to win the Le Mans race when he teamed up with Wolf. They won the race in the mighty Speed 6, which was a huge car and was famously dubbed by Ettore Bugatti as the world's fastest lorry. Birkin was regarded as the epitome of the vintage racing age through his courageous and fearless driving style. Following the withdrawal of Bentley from racing and its subsequent takeover by Rolls-Royce, Birkin won Le Mans again, but this time in an Alfa Romeo, and he received a telegram from Benito Mussolini congratulating on his win for Italy. On May 7, 1933, Birkin started the Tripoli Grand Prix in a new 3-liter Maserati 8C and finished 3rd. During a pit stop, his arm was badly burnt by a hot exhaust pipe whilst picking up a cigarette lighter. There is some suggestion that the wound turned septic, but others have said he suffered a malaria attack. It was probably a combination of both elements that proved fatal when he died at the young age of 36. Bentley honored Birkin with the limited edition Birkin on Age in 2000, Chapter 6. Glenn Kidstone. Another member of the Bentley boys who would die too young was Glenn Kidston, who, in the 32 years of his life, achieved more than most of us can achieve in a lifetime. Born at the end of the 19th century, Glenn was an English motor racing driver and an aviator. He was very much a fast-living type of guy, who was one of the Bentley boys to be based at Grosvenor Square, and his day-long parties would become legendary. Glenn, as with many of his contemporaries, joined the war effort and became a lieutenant commander in the Royal Navy during World War I. He survived being torpedoed twice in the same morning when HMS Aboukir and the Hogue were hit by German U-boats. All this when he was only 15 years of age. His adventures during the war did not end there, and he would go on to serve on the HMS Orion during the Battle of Jutland, running the open decks whilst under direct enemy fire. Having been on the receiving end of submarine torpedoes, he decided that it would be better to be the one dispatching the torpedoes instead. He served on the leading-edge British submarine, the X-1, which he would serve on during its sea trials. The boat got stuck in the mud of the seabed and would surface hours after everyone was believed to be dead. Following his Le Mans victory in 1930, Glenn turned to aviation and would go on to set the record for the flight from England to South Africa in the following year. He, however, did not make the return trip after he was killed when he borrowed a de Havilland Puss Moth. The plane broke up in mid-air when flying through a dust storm over the Drakensberg Mountains. When news of his death was announced in London, two of Glenn's lovers, Margaret Wickham and Barbara Cartlan, would claim that they fainted upon seeing the headlines in the London papers. At the age of 32, Glenn Kidston would leave behind a legacy of being the epitome of the Bentley Boys movement. He lived life to its fullest and did not regret a minute of it. If you would like more videos on the very first cars and the origins of the motor vehicle, please like, subscribe, and comment on what you would like to see. We appreciate all your help to grow this channel and the community. Until next time on The Car Cult. Welcome to The Car Cult. On this episode of the History of Cars, we explore the extraordinary rise of the Tesla electric motor car company. How did a company that was burning through millions of cash every day become a trillion-dollar car manufacturer and the darling of the motoring, technology, and finance world? Before we dive into this video, first a message on this series and the Car Cult channel. On the Car Cult channel, we are hoping to bring regular shows to you, our viewers, on all that is happening in the car world, whether it is new car announcements, car culture, or car-related entertainment and video games, or at the movies. This is your one place for everything to do with cars. In the History of Cars series, we will be exploring the nearly 200 years of the motor car. We will be diving into how the invention of the motor car changed the course of history and how it left an indelible mark on human civilization. So buckle up for some of the most fascinating stories that the motor world and history has to offer. Chapter 1. The Origins of Tesla. It may seem odd to think that Tesla has not been around forever. In its short period of existence, the name Tesla has become ubiquitous with the electric car revolution. But Tesla's success was by no means guaranteed, and in the early days looked like it would be over before it even began. We have to go all the way back to 1990, when two Silicon Valley engineers, Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning, had the germ of an idea to make electric vehicles that can be better, quicker, and more fun to drive than gasoline cars. There had been attempts in the past to make an electric car, with the very first going all the way back to 1880. One when Gustav Trove presented the three-wheel car driven by an improved Siemens motor. This would be followed by the first four-wheeled electric car, the Floken Elektrowagen, in 1888. Some of the major U.S. car manufacturers would develop electric car prototypes in the 1960s. As a cure for the finite fossil fuels in the ground and the rising fuel costs at the pump. In the mid-90s, we would see the introduction by Toyota of hybrid technology when they launched the Prius in 1997. But it would be Tesla that would take electric-powered cars into driveways and parking lots across America and throughout the world. Tesla co-founders Eberhard and Tarpenning first met when Eberhard was an engineer working for Wyse Technology, a computer hardware company, which in the 1980s created the Wyse 1000, a personal computer, and would then transition to the server industry in the 90s. The two of them would develop a passion for creating startups and would go on to launch Nouveau Media, which would release the Rockety book in 1998. The development of their second e-book reader would have an impact on the future Tesla car brand, when Eberhard was responsible for sourcing the lithium-ion cell technology, something that would become a key component to the popularization of electric car technology. Eberhard and Tarpening would be influenced to begin Tesla following the recall by General Motors of all its EV1 prototype electric cars in 2003. They had seen the opportunity to utilize the higher efficiency of battery-powered cars. To produce high-performance cars, Eberhard would attempt to purchase a prototype sports car called the AC Propulsion T0 and provided financial and technical expertise to convert the T0 to lithium-ion batteries. He tried to convince AC Propulsion founder Alan Cocconi to turn the T0 into a production car, but Cocconi declined. Eberhard would go on to say he wanted to build a car manufacturer that is also a technology company, with its core technologies as the battery, the computer software, and the proprietary motor. In 2001, Eberhard and Tarpening would meet up with Elon Musk after hearing him speak at a Mars Society talk at Stanford University. At the time, Musk was already successful with a portfolio of startups, including the co-founding of PayPal with Peter Thiel and Max Levchin. He would go on to sell PayPal to eBay a year later and would make $165 million from the sale. He would use the income generated from the PayPal sale to launch the startup SpaceX with the goal of designing, building, and launching advanced rockets and spacecrafts to Mars and beyond. In 2003, Tesla Motors, which is named after the Serbian-American inventor and electrical engineer Nikola Tesla, was officially incorporated and would aim to upset the established order of the motoring world by creating electric vehicles that were powerful, beautiful, and desired. Eberhard would serve as the CEO and Tarpening would take up the position of CFO. Ian Wright would become the third employee of Tesla. He would leave Tesla in 2004 and founded the electric vehicle powertrain company, Wright Speed. In February 2004, Tesla would raise $7.5 million, including $6.5 million from Elon Musk. Musk would take on the role of chairman of the board of directors and would become the largest shareholder of Tesla. In May of the same year, J.B. Straubel would join Tesla as its chief technical officer. J.B. would complete Tesla's founding team, and thoughts would turn to the design, development, and production of Tesla's first car. Chapter 2. Development of the Roadster. With Musk's investment into Tesla, he took on a more active role in the company and would even oversee the design of its first car, the Roadster. The company set itself the goal of developing a premium sports car that would be aimed at early adopters and would then go on to challenge the more mainstream car segments, including sedans and SUVs. Musk would lead the next funding round in February 2006, where the company would raise $13 million. And then in May 2006, Tesla would receive a further $40 million investment from the likes of Google co-founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page. A fourth round of investment would be received a year later when $45 million was raised, bringing the total investment in Tesla to $105 million. All this investment would allow the company to charge full speed ahead with the development of the Roadster. The Roadster would become the first highway-legal serial production, all-electric car to use lithium-ion battery cells. The car could achieve 245 miles on a single charge, something completely unheard of in the electric car market. On top of this, the Roadster could match the performance of its gasoline-powered supercar rivals with a 0 to 60 miles per hour figure of 3.7 seconds. The carbon fiber body kept the weight down and would be based on the chassis of the British sports car, the Lotus Elise. Tesla had entered into an agreement with Lotus for it to produce gliders, which are essentially complete cars, minus the powertrain. A total of 2,400 units would be produced by the time the deal was ended in December 2011. Tesla would officially reveal the prototype Roadster on July 16, 2006 in Santa Monica, California, at a 350-person invitation-only event. The car achieved efficiency ratings of the equivalent of 135 miles per gallon compared with internal combustion engine cars. Tesla Motors received the Global Green 2006 Product Design Award for the design of the Roadster and would be presented with the award by none other than Mikhail Gorbachev. When released in 2008, the car would come in at an eye-watering price of over $100,000, and whilst the car could travel 245 miles on a single charge when plugged into a wall socket, the Roadster would require at least 24 hours to charge. Chapter 3. Elon takes the wheel. Soon after the reveal of the Roadster, Eberhard would be asked by the board to step down as the CEO. He would take on the role of President of Technology for a short while, but ultimately left the company in January 2008. Tarpening would also leave the company. Musk began day-to-day running of Tesla when he took on the role of CEO in October 2008, and to meet his goal of achieving positive cash flow, he would fire nearly a quarter of Tesla's staff in one of his first moves as CEO. Musk would receive the very first Tesla Roadster in February 2008, and full production would begin on March 17, 2008. By January 2009, Tesla had raised $187 million and delivered only 147 cars, with Musk contributing $70 million of his own money. On May 19, 2009, Daimler, the parent company of Mercedes-Benz, acquired 10% of Tesla for $50 million. Musk would go on to say that the Daimler investment saved the company. Further investment came from the United States Department of Energy when it approved a $465 million loan as part of the $8 billion Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Loan Program. This loan would be used to support the engineering and production of the Model S, as well as the development of Tesla's advanced powertrain technology. In March 2009, Tesla unveiled its second car, the Model S. The Tesla Model S was a luxury four-door sedan with 518 horsepower and starting at a price of $76,000. Within 2 months, reservations would surpass 1,000. Tesla announced that it had achieved overall corporate profitability for the month of July 2009, when the company had earned $1 million on revenue of $20 million. This profit was primarily driven by the increased margin arising from the updated 2010 Roadster model. On June 29, 2010, Tesla's successful IPO would see the Tesla team, including Musk, ringing the opening bell of NASDAQ. The IPO resulted in a valuation at close on its first day of trading of $2.2 billion for Tesla, some way off the trillion-dollar valuation the company would go on to achieve in the future. Chapter 4. Launch of the Models S and X. With the sky the limit for Tesla, they moved into a new HQ at Palo Alto, California, and announced further investment from Toyota of $50 million and a joint venture to develop electric cars and parts. Tesla moved into a factory in Fremont, California, which previously housed a plant jointly operated by General Motors and Toyota. Tesla would use the Fremont factory for production of the models S, X, and 3 in the future. In October 2011, Musk showed off the Model S car in a private event at the Fremont plant. In 2012, Tesla stopped production of the Roadster in order to concentrate on the new Model S, which had already received wide acclaim from automotive critics for its performance and modern design. The Model S came with 3 different battery options, which gave an estimated range of 235 or 300 miles. Unlike the Roadster, which carried the battery system in the rear of the car, the Model S had it underneath the floor. creating a lower center of gravity, improving handling and giving extra storage space at the back. The Model S would also see the introduction of Tesla's autopilot feature, providing semi-autonomous driving in 2014. The Model S won several automotive awards, including the prestigious Motor Trend Car of the Year for 2013, and would become the first electric car to top the monthly car sales list in September. But it was the rollout of Tesla's own superchargers in the United States and Europe that would see Tesla take a giant leap forward. The superchargers offered Tesla owners with a super-fast means of charging their cars on the go. The days of spending 24 hours charging your Tesla being left firmly behind. Better still, you could charge your Tesla for free. To help charge your Teslas more efficiently, Tesla entered the energy storage market when it unveiled its Tesla Power Wall for the home and Tesla Power Pack battery packs for businesses in 2015. The company valued the orders it received within a week of the announcement at $800 million. In September 2015, Tesla began shipping the Model X. The luxury SUVs came with the revolutionary Falcon doors, helping drivers to get in and out of tight parking spots. Tesla received 25,000 pre-orders. Chapter 5. Global Domination. Hot on the heels of the Model X announcement, in April 2016, Tesla unveiled its first mass-market electric car with the launch of the Model 3 sedan. Compared with previous models, this was designed to be inexpensive, coming in at a starting price of $35,000 and received reservations totaling $325,000 within a week. In order to speed up production, something Tesla had been troubled with in the past, they invested heavily in robotics and automation on the assembly line for the Model 3. This would, however, turn into what the company described as production hell when production actually slowed, leading to significant delays. These troubles increased financial pressures on Tesla, and investors would begin to short the company's stock. In the midst of these problems, Musk tweeted out that he was considering taking Tesla private, something that did not ultimately happen but would lead to lawsuits, including a securities fraud charge from the SEC, which resulted in Musk stepping down as the company's chairman, although he was allowed to stay on as the CEO. These challenges would be overcome, and between 2018 and 2021, the Model 3 would be the world's best-selling electric car. Tesla reported 4 consecutive profitable quarters for the first time, which led to it becoming the most valuable car manufacturer in the world, when its share price increased 740%, leading to a valuation of $848 billion, more than the next 9 largest car manufacturers combined. Tesla would blow past the $1 trillion valuation mark in October 2021, when its share price hit over $1,000. This valuation came off the back of the introduction of its second mass-market car in March 2019, the Model Y, a mid-sized crossover SUV based on the Model 3. Tesla then invested heavily in expanding its production capacity with the opening of 3 new gigafactories. Shanghai would start rollout of Model 3s less than a year after groundbreaking. The Berlin-Brandenburg Gigafactory would break ground in February 2020 and begin production of the Model Y in March 2022. The Texas Gigafactory broke ground shortly after, in June 2020, and began production of the Model Y in April 2022. A further Gigafactory in Mexico is planned for 2025. Chapter 6. An Electric Future. Not only have Tesla revolutionized the electric car market and battery storage, but it has also revolutionized the way car manufacturers sell their vehicles to the public, particularly in the United States. Unlike other car manufacturers, Tesla does not rely on franchised dealerships. Instead, it sells directly to the consumer through its own website and a network of company-owned stores. In some countries, like the US, there is a prohibition on car manufacturers selling directly to consumers. In these areas, Tesla has introduced what it calls galleries, where the company can educate and inform customers about its product, with the customer then purchasing their Tesla online. Tesla was also the first to popularize the air updates to cars already out in the wild. This allowed Tesla to introduce new features and to fix problems which would otherwise require costly recalls. It gives more control to Tesla customers to purchase new features, such as enhanced autopilot and full self-driving features, months or years after they initially purchased their Tesla. These features, in particular, are what are set to ensure Tesla's lead over other manufacturers. In 2020, Tesla released software updates, which allowed its car to recognize other vehicles on the road and to automatically stop at stop signs and traffic lights. Tesla would replace radar sensors with cameras in its Model 3 and Model Y cars, something which would prove controversial with industry experts. Tesla is seeking to introduce its much-delayed full self-driving capability, with first beta version of the software released on October 22, 2020, to a small group of testers. Tesla has taken a different approach to its self-driving technology compared with other manufacturers such as Waymo and Cruise, which are relying on creating a highly detailed three-dimensional map through the use of LiDAR and ultrasonic sensors. Tesla has ditched the LiDAR sensors and is looking to use coarse-grained two-dimensional maps. Tesla has many skeptics. But then Tesla has had skeptics throughout its trillion-dollar story and has overcome them all. What does the future hold for Tesla's new models? Well, it was all the way back in 2017 when Tesla announced the semi-truck concept, which would boast a center-mounted seat and a promised range of 500 miles or 400 miles on a 30-minute charge. In theory, the Semi would save drivers at least $200,000 in fuel costs over 1 million miles. The other concept, announced at the time, was the new Tesla Roadster, which was to come in at a cost of $200,000 and was claimed to hit 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 1.9 seconds, something that is likely to be hitting the road sooner than the Tesla Semi or Roadster is the Tesla Cybertruck, a futuristic, angular pickup truck that can travel 500 miles on a single charge and hit 60 miles per hour in just 2.9 seconds. During the launch presentation, a demo of the strength of the armored glass would go badly wrong when Musk smashed the glass. This would not deter customers when Musk unveiled a pre-order list of 250,000. During the investor presentation in April 2023, Tesla unveiled its Master Plan Part 3. In it, Tesla would outline its vision for the path to sustainable global energy economy. Included within the presentation was a pathway to the replacement of gasoline vehicles with 1.4 billion electric vehicles. The plan involves the rollout of 2 previously unannounced cars from Tesla that were shrouded in white sheets. What is clear is that Tesla is not lacking in any ambition for the future, and Tesla is not done with changing the motoring world. If you would like more videos on Tesla and the history of cars, please like, subscribe, and comment on what you would like to see. We appreciate all your help to grow this channel and the community. Until next time on The Car Cult. Welcome to the Car Cult. Imagine a world where you have the freedom of personal transportation, but with the ability to take to the skies to avoid that pesky rush hour traffic. There is no car that has become more associated with this wonderful idea than the DeLorean. So why did this unique car end up destroying the DMC Motor Company and become a fan favorite that nobody bought? On this episode of the History of Cars, we explore the extraordinary fall from grace of the DeLorean Motor Company. To show your support for the Car Cult channel, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification icon to keep up with our latest videos. Chapter 1. The Rise of John DeLorean. We start our story of the DeLorean Motor Company with its mercurial founder, John DeLorean. John was aptly born in Motor City, Detroit, Michigan, in 1925. John, like so many young men at the time, was drafted into military service and would earn an honorable discharge in 1946 after serving 3 years in the U.S. Army. After completing his degree, he would take a number of engineering jobs before he would land his first big job at Packard, an engineering company making highly precise, automatic transmissions. He would quickly make improvements to their flagship product, the Ultramatic automatic transmission, before he caught the eye of General Motors and was offered a choice of jobs at any of GM's 5 divisions. John would choose to work at GM's Pontiac division and would go on to produce dozens of patented innovations for Pontiac before being promoted in 1961 to chief engineer. John went on to design the Pontiac GTO, which was named after the legendary Ferrari 250 GTO. Under John's stewardship, Pontiac reached 3rd place in annual sales in the United States, and he was rewarded with a promotion to head of the Pontiac division in 1965. John was only 40 at the time, and he began to struggle with being out of the garage and in the executive office. John began to enjoy the celebrity status that came with his position, and he spent much of his time traveling around the world to support promotional events. But this only enhanced John's standing in GM, which was seeing flagging sales across the brand. He would be promoted again, this time to head up GM's premier Chevrolet marque. John's time at Chevy was an astounding success, with John taking the division to record sales of in excess of 3 million cars, which matched the entire Ford Motor Company at the time. John's successful turnaround of the Chevy division would lead to him being appointed the vice president of car and truck production for the whole GM business. It seemed his continued rise up the GM business seemed inevitable. However, the idea of John becoming president of GM was unbearable for many other GM executives, and on April 2, 1973, he announced that he was leaving GM, that the rumors persisted that he had been fired. Chapter 2. DeLorean Motor Company is born. John was not the type to go quietly into the sunset, and soon after leaving GM, he would form his own car brand, the DeLorean Motor Company. DMC would show off a 2-seat sports car prototype in the mid-1970s. The DeLorean safety vehicle had an exterior designed by Design. The car was made of a distinctive stainless steel body. Think of the Tesla Cybertruck, and featured gull-wing doors. The futuristic design became a favorite of car critics and the public. The car would enter production as simply the DeLorean and was powered by the Dovan V6 engine, developed jointly by Peugeot, Renault, and Volvo. Oddly, the car was not built in the United States, and production of the new car started in Dunmurry, a suburb of Belfast in Northern Ireland. The major draw for DMC to operate from the Northern Ireland was the significant financial incentives of £100 million offered by the Northern Ireland Development Agency. Renault was contracted to build the factory and to make the engines for the DeLorean, with Lotus designing the chassis and bodywork details. There would be 3 different concept vehicles proposed by DMC before the company would hit the brakes. First was the DMC-24, which was intended as a 4-seater sedan, which would retain the distinctive shape of the DeLorean, including the gull-wing doors. One design had 2 doors with the cabin and doors stretched to allow rear entry and rear seating. Think of a Rolls-Royce, Wraith, or Koenigsegg. The other 4-door design was produced as a rolling mock-up by Design and was based on the Lancia Medusa concept car. The next concept car was called the DMC-44 and was proposed as a lightweight 4x4 off-road vehicle. A tubular frame prototype was created and a promotional video was made to attract investors. The final and wackiest vehicle was a DMC bus called the DMC-80. The company produced a promotional brochure for public transit corporations. It's fair to say if DMC was still alive today, it would have a back catalog of some of the most innovative and weird cars of any brand. However, there was bad news ahead for DMC. Chapter 3. The DeLorean runs into trouble. The DeLorean experienced significant production delays and only started deliveries in January 1981, which turned out to be a bad time to release a new car, as the United States was experiencing an economic recession in 1980. The DeLorean also received lukewarm reviews from car critics, with the higher price and lower horsepower compared to other sports cars on the market, being particularly unpopular. The unique design of the DeLorean was not enough to push the car to success, and whilst the Chevrolet Corvette sold in record yearly numbers of 40,000 cars in 1980 and 1981, by February 1982, only half of the DeLoreans produced at the time were sold, and DMC found itself in $175 million of debt, and the Dunmurry factory entered into receivership. The Dunmurry factory would eventually build around 9,000 cars, and the American Express catalog would even list a DeLorean plated in 24-karat gold. Originally 100 were planned, but only 4 were ever purchased. In January 1982, the British government discovered that DMC had built just 8,500 cars, and almost half of the funds that had been provided to them as subsidies, the equivalent of £23 million, had been transferred to an overseas account in Panama. The company stated that they intended to use the funds to subsidize Lotus, but the funds would never make it there. The factory was seized by the British government. On October 19, 1982, John was arrested in the United States following a sting operation where he was recorded by FBI agents agreeing to bankroll a cocaine smuggling operation. The FBI would arrange for more than 59 pounds of cocaine worth $6.5 million in 1982 in a hotel near Los Angeles International Airport. He would be set up by a neighbor, James Timothy Hoffman, who said he had heard John say he needed $17 million in a hurry to prevent DMC going into insolvency. John would manage to escape prison when he was able to argue that the FBI and DEA had unfairly targeted and entrapped him into a criminal conspiracy, simply because he was financially vulnerable at the time. By the time his legal issues had been resolved in August 1984, DMC had already collapsed into bankruptcy, and with it, John's reputation in the car world. John would go on to quip, "Would you buy a used car for me?" Chapter 4. The DeLorean is out of time. It may be odd to be talking about a car and car company that only existed for 7 years, but the mark that the DeLorean has left on the car world and in popular culture is undeniable. That is, thanks to a little movie trilogy called Back to the Future. In it, the DeLorean would be converted into a time machine by Doc Brown. DMC would have already closed by the time of the release of the first movie, but this would only add to the prestige of the DeLorean. In the first movie, 6 DeLoreans would be used throughout the production, along with a fiberglass model where the full-size DeLorean was required to fly on screen. The cars had the original V6 engines, but the sound used in the movies would be from a V8 from the Porsche 928. 2 of the cars used in Back to the Future, Part 3, would be fitted with Volkswagen engines and Dune buggy chassis for filming the western scenes. The DeLorean would get its time travel ability from the flux capacitor, which allows the car to travel to the past or future, but not through space. In order to unlock its time travel ability, the car would have to accelerate to 88 miles per hour. Interestingly, the production version of the DeLorean had a speedometer that only went up to 85 miles per hour, and the production team would have to modify the speedo in order to hit the magical 88 miles per hour. The time machine is electric, which requires a power input of 1.21 gigawatts, or 1,620,000 horsepower, and is powered by a plutonium-fueled nuclear reactor. Only 3 of the cars still exist, with Universal Studios owning 2 of the cars. The third car, used in Part 3, was restored and sold at auction in 2011 for $541,200. You can see a fully restored DeLorean from the movies at the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles. After some years away from the spotlight, John would attempt to relaunch DMC and gave interviews describing a new vehicle called the DMC-2. However, it was not meant to be, as the DMC name was purchased by a Texas-based firm, which provided parts and restoration services to existing DeLorean owners. The DeLorean would not only be immortalized in the Back to the Future movies, but also on the tombstone of John DeLorean when he died from a stroke at the age of 80 in 2005. On a future episode of History of Cars, we may dive into the crazy world of John DeLorean. Let us know in the comments if you would like to see a video on this. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification icon to keep up to date with the latest from the Car Cult channel. Until next time on Car Cult.